Hi, my name is Brenda, and today I'll be talking about the book Reframing Organizations along with what I learned in class from my Business 200 class at Borough of Manhattan Community College. We talk about two chapters in the book, which is the political frame and the symbolic frame. And these chapters conclude to the power, conflict, and coalition, the manager as politician, the organization as political arenas and political agents, organizational symbols and culture, culture in action, along with organization as theaters. These are broken down into 6 chapters, and 3 chapters conclude to the political and the symbolic frame. So, in the book, in chapter 9, we talk about the political frame and how the chapter 9 begins with the power, conflict, and coalition. We talked about it in class how a coalition is basically a relationship with two people, and how we also talk about power, which is the ability to influence other behavior along with having authority. We also described how power had to be also respect and freedom. And in the book, we talk about how the political frame views organizations as rolling arenas, and they host basically a contest between who wins and who loses. And we talk about how these relationships with different people have different values and beliefs, along with different information and interest. And these are basically important because those are the decisions that they make and who gets what they want. So, in the book, they described how the Boeing airline basically created a plane that was the 737 MAX and had a lot of flaws in the aircraft because of mismanagement between the FFA and the Boeing. So what happened was that they had this automatic system called the MCAS, which is a maneuvering characteristic augmentation system built in the plane, but because they rushed to build this plane, the sensors had failed to do its duty, and it automatically was controlling the plane of the angles. And this basically overrode the crew control of the aircraft because it pushed the nose of the plane down. And as they were trying to control the plane, they failed, and 13 minutes into the flight, they crashed, killing 189 people on board. But the thing was that the Federal Aviation Administration, they talked about it with Boeing, and then they continued to let the plane work with the airline systems. And it was until another 5 months later where another 737 MAX airline crashed, and they only lasted like 6 minutes in the sky, and they try to follow all the directions that Boeing had provided them from the first incident that happened, but it was no use to them, and they ended up crashing, killing along another 149 people with 8 crew members as well. So this was because the Boeing company tried to rush in making the plane because American Airlines threatened them that they were going to buy from Airbus. And due to this, the Boeing management took out the sensors, which had supposed to be 2 sensors, and then they only put one, but that failed to follow the thing that it was supposed to do, and it created risks to the plane. They rather had preferred their company profits over the safety of their own air staff and other passengers that also rided with the plane. In the book, there was also a second example, which was the Challenger Space 7. This is a collision between NASA and Morton Thiokol Corporation, and 7 astronauts that were supposed to go to space on January 28th. But this ended up in a horrible accident because in the moment that they were supposed to take off, the shuttle exploded and along with the booster rockets, and the shuttle crew died, and they basically had to have a conference between what had happened and what went wrong. But previously that day, they experienced cold weather and the rings failed to do what it was supposed to do, and the motor blew up. But the engineers at Morton Thiokol Corporation, they recommended that NASA wait for warmer weather, and they basically try to warn NASA that they needed to wait for them to delay the launch. But as they told NASA this, NASA responded to them in an exaggerated manner and told the manager of Morton that if they were to want them to launch it in next April, as in like being exaggerating because they didn't want them to launch it that very same day that they wanted to. And the senior managers basically conversed and decided against the advice of the engineers and decided to do this launch. So basically, the both of these relationships had a disagreement and they had a conflict between what they wanted to do. And since NASA senior management thought that they could overrule the engineers, it ended up resulting in them having the astronauts along with the spacecraft plummet and explode into the sea, killing all of those astronauts along with the teacher that was supposed to be the first ever person to launch in space. So, how these relate to the chapter, both Boeing and NASA, they had collisions between engineers and senior management, and Boeing had a collision with the global economy that concluded to customers and government regulators. So, Boeing tried to reduce their time and their cost with the um, conflict of the FFA responsibility for them being safe, along with NASA wanting more um, funding for their space launches. And in both cases, time and money were short, and delays carried a high price for them. So they feared that falling behind of this, the senior management overruled the engineers and thought that they were okay to do this and keep their customers satisfied when in reality they were risking the profits of their own company and customer safety. So the conference of this debate between the NASA and the government, they had a problem with trying to reduce funding, and also with the managers at Theocol, they were disappointed because they tried to warn NASA how the rubber O-rings were going to fail because of the cold weather, and they were not going to be able to withstand the launch, along with the FFA being responsible for the Boeing company's 737 MAX. Since they didn't decide to stop the continuing launches of the um, 737 MAX when the first fatal accident occurred, this caused a lot of like uh, conflict between the FFA because they failed to see that the Boeing airline company were just risking the people's safety in turn for their profits. And this is how both companies risked their profits, and it was at stake. So in the political frame, we talk about power as well, and power also has to do something with authority, and that's what a group also needs in an organization. So authorities are entitled to make decisions and to other people, and any member of a coalition, which is a relationship between two groups or more, they want to basically be able to have an influence to gain social control. And we also talk about how we have partisans and agents, which have something to do, like, for example, parents. They have a function of authority. They have control over what their kids eat, what their kids watch on televisions, what time they go to sleep, etc. And children can be considered as partisans because they will basically try to influence the parents to have something what they want. They always try to point out what the other sibling has, and they could form coalitions with their grandparents or somewhere in their family to be like relatives to get what they want. So overall, authority is basically essential because it is a position that you have social control on a situation. And for authorities and partisans, they both have a potential source of power. So, a list of major powers in an organization concludes to authority, control of rewards, cohesive power, information and expertise, reputation, alliances, and these conclude to being able to have a position in power and communication, as well as the ability to deliver jobs, the ability to interfere when something is happening. You have to have the ability to have uh, acknowledge the information that is given to you to have problem solve and to have records of accomplishments on performance along with getting things done in an organization. Lastly, for conflict, we talked about this in class as well, how conflict is a disagreement between two groups, and how conflict is normally not a bad thing because this can bring out new ideas and new ways to problem solve for different groups. And this can be good because this becomes a way to be able to come to an agreement for the organization and the individuals in the groups as well. So this concludes to the chapter 9 of reframing organizations, and we'll now talk about chapter 10, which is the manager and politician. So in chapter 10, we talk about the manager as politician, and it also brings up the example that we talked about in chapter 9 with the 737 MAX and the Challenger. So they talk about how they both of these companies provided a lesson that these political pressures that they had with launching the aircraft as well as the Challenger had created a disaster based on their self interest. And this led to many differences where they try to have interpretations of what was going on but failed. And they had also had a contest of who gets what they want. So, for example, the Morton Thiokol Corporation reached out to NASA stating that not to launch the rocket because the rubber O-rings were going to fail due to the cold weather. They failed to listen to the engineers at Morton Thiokol, and this resulted into uh, explosion for the Challenger along with the Boeing's 737 MAX. They failed to acknowledge that the MCAS were dangerous, and this resulted into two different air crafts crashing and killing a lot of people in result to their self-interest. So, for the political skills, the manager as politician has four key skills, which conclude to the agenda setting, mapping the political terrain, networking and building coalitions, and lastly, bargaining and negotiation. So, an agenda in general states a goal and schedules a list of activities that has interest or getting things done. This concludes through having an agenda with two major elements, which is a vision and a strategy. Agenda has to have a vision and a strategy because it basically has a way of gathering information and creates that vision that we need, as well as having that strategy to later assess that in the plan for what we need to have change in the organization. For the mapping the political terrain, managers launch a new initiative to 4 steps in developing the political map, which is determining channels of informal communication, identifying principal agents of political influence, analyze possibility for mobilizing internal and external players, along with anticipating counter strategies. And an example, which would be to create the political map for any situation, is um, who's the players, who's in the game, the power of how much each player likely has, and the interest that each player wants. In networking and building coalitions, for example, in the 737 MAX and the Challenger space in Chapter 9, we saw like engineers, they try to provide their arguments to the superiors, but they failed to reason with their bosses, and this resulted in a catastrophic loss for human life. The thing about political influence is you being able to figure out what players need to be influenced. For example, the 737 MAX, they had to have their superiors be influenced, but they failed to do this. They have to be able to determine where the leadership challenges will be, which is being able to convince the superiors why it would have been dangerous to even launch in the first place, and then being able to hold them close because they're considered an enemy due to them not listening to them. And if step 3 doesn't work to holding them close, you have to implement that forceful method of explaining why it was dangerous in the first place. But the first task of building networks and coalitions is figuring out whose help you need and developing relationships so people would be there for when you need them. And um, for managers, they need to be able to have friends or allies to get things done. They need to be basically having support in order to build those coalitions. And these are basically what the networking and building coalitions is about. And for the bargaining and negotiations, we basically bargain with labor transactions, legal and commercial, and negotiations can occur whenever two or more parties with some interest in common with others, as well as conflict, that they need to reach an agreement. So remember that we talked about in chapter 9 with conflict. Conflict is basically a disagreement between two or more groups, and in this case, chapter 10 falls more into that. And they talk about the negotiation is choosing between creating values, and values are basically um, being able to establish what you believe in and why you believe in that. And it has 4 strategies, which being is those 4 strategies conclude to separating people from the problem and focusing on interest, leading to a durable, peaceful agreement, along with insisting an objective to both of those people that want to come to an agreement. So, this is concluding to the um, bargaining and negotiation from chapter 10. In chapter 11, we finally come to the last chapter of the political frame, which is the organizations as political arenas and political agents. So, the chapter has a lot of examples that consist of Walmart, Microsoft, and much more. But in general, the chapter talks about how organizations are both arenas for internal politics and political agents with their own agendas, resources, and strategies. For the arenas is basically a place that holds different players and their interests and agendas. The rules of uh, the arena has consists of how the game will be played and how the player's interest will be pursued. And for the agents, they're very powerful and important tools because they achieve the purpose of whoever controls them. They are also needed for their support and resources. But we'll talk about the examples that they give us in the book, which is Walmart. As you may know, Walmart is a large company that's all around the world in America, and about 90% of American households' items are at Walmart stores every year. And as you may know, Walmart has been faced with accusations such as the company's abusing workers, exploiting blacks, and destroying small businesses. Walmart tried to cover this up by trying to help out during Hurricane Katrina in 2005 by providing um, people free canned foods and much more to communities that were affected by the hurricane. And this gained a lot of publicity for them, and this created people to thank them for being able to provide them food when they had needed it in the time. So, Walmart also houses an arena for internal conflict and a political agent because they are often trying to pursue their own interest in the organization. And in 2012, the company had experienced their first union strike with the workers in many different cities. And although shoppers felt sympathy for them, they still decided to shop at Walmart because they couldn't afford to pass the low prices. As you can see, this is a arena for the Walmart staff and the company itself, because as the staff doesn't feel appreciated and they feel like they're being abused, Walmart is still holding up to what they want to give out to their customers, which is basically low prices. For the organizations as arena, we have an example that the book provided us, which is a clear example of how an arena works. So there's always a constant change, and for this example, they had a man named Ross Johnson that was ascending the ranks at standard brands. But he had a very big spending and created a friction with his superiors. Despite this, he managed to win over the board and controlled the board, resulting in the termination of his colleague, and this created him to be wanting to spend more due to him getting more benefits. Following this, he had a successful merger with Nabisco and acquired the company, but displayed a little bit disconcern for managing it. And later on, after he had the merger with R.J. Reynolds, they removed him because of that merger falling through. As you can see, it was an arena because as he was trying to be more ascended in the ranks, he ended up eliminating his colleague and gaining over more control of the board. This resulted him as being in an arena due to him competing over the position that he wanted and outing the old colleague, resulting in him getting more benefits in what he wanted. In the organization as political agents, they talk about how organizations depend on their environment for resources they need to survive. For example, they also talk about the organizations needing to master the basic skills of an individual managers as politicians, which conclude to delivering the agenda, mapping the environment, managing relationships with both allies and enemies, as well as negotiating accords and alliances. So, the book gave us an example, which was Uber, founded by two young entrepreneurs in San Francisco. They became a company that grew very quickly, and they had many challenges and conflicts with different taxi operators in nearly every market that they entered. But what their company had was innovation, customer service, and freedom from these industries that was very important to their customers, as their customers were their allies. And this example was having an author place a phone call for a taxi to come pick him up to drop him off at the airport. And when the taxi company failed to pick him up at the promised time that they said that they were going to pick him up, he didn't decide to wait for the taxi company to fix their mistake, but rather call Uber. And Uber managed to get him at his arrived time that he was supposed to get there. This created an importance to them because they had their customers be their allies in order for their company to succeed in the market that they had a challenge in competing. In chapter 12, we finally get to talk about the symbolic frame. And the symbolic frame basically carries a powerful and emotional message that speaks to the heart and soul. It focuses on how symbols can help humans make sense of something like an image or an event or a belief. It can be a speech or anything in general. So they talk about how managers can portray symbols. They can either create parties, picnics, barbecues, an event for the company to portray what they want. And companies who created symbols in their organizations um, have something that they stand for or teach something else. It conveys something like a meaning of what they want for their company. This can be based on hopes and beliefs, and this can also be expressed in different ways by, like I said before, an image, speech, and more, you know? And one thing that we can have as a symbol, for example, was the 9/11. They had firefighters and police giving up their lives to save the victims that faced this tragedy in the World Trade Center, along with, let's say, the 2012 shooting of 20 children and the caretaker of Sandy Hook School. Um, Many people mourned all over the nation, as well as President Obama saying something on national TV, as well as dropping a tear. This is a good example of how um, symbol represents based on the tragic mournings and spirit that they faced in those horrible tragic events. Um, Symbols can also divide as well as unify, and for example, one of the recent things that we have was COVID 19. We had people face this thing where symbolism of the mask had different meanings. So, for example, I wore a mask when the pandemic was happening. The reason why I did it was because I wanted to protect other people along with myself. I didn't want to get sick, and I didn't want to get anybody sick. And many people portrayed the mask as an opposite thing. They thought of it as them being free, and I thought of it as me protecting myself. For example, like Donald Trump supporters, they weren't wearing masks because they thought that it represented freedom and loyalty to their president at that time. But for people like me, they wore the mask because they saw it as a symbol of responsibility and concerns for other people along with their health. Now, the symbol, the symbolic frame, it interprets different meanings along with a belief of what that image, event, or even thing represents to you. Um, this also talks about how the symbolic frame also forms ideas and disciplines for organizations. And for the symbolic frame in an organization, this can be like, for example, Target. I know that you guys know that Target has a dog with the bull with the red bull eye. And this is a symbol, such as like as well as Aflac. Aflac has a duck for their company. And it's not even about ducks. Same with Geico. Like Geico is an insurance company and they have a gecko for their marketing. This is all um, symbols, and this represents how many symbols take forms in organizations. So this concludes to the symbolic frame for the chapter 12 of Reframing Organization. So in chapter 13, we talk about culture and action. This involves putting and building a team mainly that puts the right people in the right structure. And this involves managers being accountable for how they need to put people in the right place along with the leaders, recognizing the team and building how they will be structured. So, for this, we talk about how um, organizations have to follow different things, which creates how somebody becomes a group member, how their diversity supports the team's competitive advantage, along with how they hold together, how their specialized language fosters commitment, along with how their stories and values reinforces group identity, and how their humor and play reduces tension and encourages creativity, along with their ceremonies to lift up people in the organization and reinforces their values. And to become a member, you have to know that it involves more than a rational decision. It's a mutual choice marketed by some form of ritual. For the diversity, it's a competitive advantage because there are different groups, and for the for the team holding together, you have to be able to work and contribute to solve different problems to make the organization keep moving. So this has to be um, having a decision to control what common goal they want to succeed in. For their specialized language, they both reflect and shape a group's culture because this allows team members to communicate easily with minimal misunderstanding. So, with the stories, they have high performing groups that keep traditions alive and provide examples to channel everyday behavior. This can be like a story of a important event that occurred that reminds an organization that they should be thinking about success and how they can solve different situations in the organization. For humor and play, these groups often focus on the tasks, and these teams balance play and humor with being able to joke around and have team spirit. This can reduce tension and resolve different issues from the organizations. And for the ritual and ceremony, it is expressive occasions such as like celebrating somebody's work anniversary, like If somebody has been working for the company for more than a decade, this can be a ritual or a ceremony that you can celebrate. This can be part of the symbolic frame because you're acknowledging that somebody has been there for so long, dedicating their life to this work and providing success to the company and themselves overall. Um, the contribution for informal cultural players, this is mostly how every group in an organization needs somebody who has a spiritual need. And the chapter talks about how soul is the secret of success because this is how members have a commitment and um, have a different type of ritual when they sign up with the company, along with how they have intensified diversity to be exceptional leaders and um, have this common language that they learn along with using the rituals, play, and humor. So, this is what chapter 13 mostly talks about. It talks about how the um, symbolic frame of this point of view is how people are put in the right structures based on their culture and how they will provide success to the company overall. And chapter 14 is the last chapter that concludes of the symbolic frame, and the title is Organizations as Theater. We talked about this in class for a little bit, and we said how organizations in theaters is mostly like plays or performances. And in the book, it talks about how um, organizations are usually judged as much on appearance as on outcomes, and how the right drama gives audience the performance they expect. Now, they also talk about theories of management and organizations that focuses on instrumental issues, and usually when they see problems, they try to solve them and then ask themselves if they ever accomplished anything. Sometimes the answers could be no or not even a lot of what they accomplished, but this creates a repetition that things always stay the same. But these messages can bring helplessness and things won't get better from there. For the theoretical imagery, it offers a much more helpful note because it provides you to have faith and belief. It also brings a play called change, and it talks about how things were expressed and what was recasted. So a good play assures us that each day is much more exciting and fulfilling, and that meaning will last much longer. If things go bad, then the symbols will create another tune that will cause the organization to feel like the repetition of nothing will change. So, overall, the organization, as we said, is mostly on how the organization performs and how they manage on their performance and how they're viewed in the organization. This concludes to the ending of my video for the Reframing Organizations book for my Business 200 class at BMCC. I talked about the political frame along with the symbolic frames and described what each chapter gave us along with what I learned in class and from my personal experience that I provided in one of the chapters. I really appreciate everybody taking the time to listen to what I have to say on my thoughts of this book as well, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. Thank you.